The rusty bicycle bell echoed through the empty garage as Marcus Bennett stood frozen in the doorway. 3 years. 3 years since he'd heard that sound, and it still made his chest tighten like a vice. The red Schwinn hung from hooks on the Wixama wall, dust particles dancing in the afternoon sunlight that streamed through the single window. Its chrome handlebars caught the light, throwing small rainbows across the concrete floor where oil stains told stories of weekend projects that would never be finished. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus turned away, but the damage was done. The memories were already flooding back, uninvited and unwelcome as always. The accident happened on a Tuesday. Marcus would always remember that detail because Tuesdays had been their day. Every Tuesday after school, 8-year-old Emma would burst through the front door of their suburban Denver home, backpack flying, pigtails bouncing, ready for their weekly bike ride adventure. She'd inherited his love for cycling, though, at 8. Her version involved more zigzagging and impromptu stops to examine interesting rocks than his methodical touring style. Dad, can we go to the park with the big hill today? Emma's voice still rang clear in his memory, high and excited, full of the kind of boundless energy that only children possess. She'd been wearing her favorite purple helmet with the butterfly sticker she'd carefully applied herself, slightly crooked but applied with such concentration that Marcus hadn't had the heart to straighten them. That Tuesday started like all the others. Marcus had been working from home, managing software implementations for a mid-sized logistics company. The kind of work that paid well but left him feeling disconnected from anything meaningful. Emma was his connection to joy, to spontaneity, to the simple pleasure of feeling wind in your hair as you coasted down a hill with your arms stretched wide. They'd loaded their bikes into his Honda Pilot, Emma chattering nonstop about her day. At Riverside Elementary, her teacher, Mrs. Patterson, had praised her math work. She'd traded her apple slices for Tommy Morrison's cookies at lunch. She'd found a caterpillar on the playground and spent recess watching it crawl across her palm. These mundane details were precious to Marcus now, preserved in his memory like pressed flowers in a book he was afraid to open. Cherry Creek State Park was their usual destination. The bike paths wound through cottonwood groves and around them. Reservoir, offering gentle hills perfect for a father teaching his daughter the joy of cycling. Emma had graduated from training wheels the previous summer, and Tuesday rides had become her favorite way to practice her newfound independence. Marcus remembered every detail of that ride with crystalline clarity. Emma had worn her mint green t-shirt with the unicorn on the front, paired with striped leggings that she'd insisted were fancy pants worthy of their adventure. Her sneakers were untied, as usual, despite his gentle reminders about safety. She'd developed the habit of stopping every few hundred yards to retie them, using it as an excuse to catch her breath and point out interesting cloud formations or squirrels. "Look, Dad, that cloud looks like a dragon breathing fire," she'd called out, wobbling slightly as she pointed skyward while still gripping her handlebars. Marcus had followed her gaze, smiling at her imagination, making the appropriate sounds of amazement that delighted her so much. The path that day was busier than usual. It was one of those perfect September afternoons when the heat of summer had finally broken, replaced by the crisp promise of autumn. Joggers passed them in steady rhythms, their breathing visible in small puffs. Dog walkers managed various breeds on extendable leashes that seemed to snake across the entire width of the path. Families like theirs had claimed benches and picnic tables, children's laughter mixing with the distant sound of water lapping against the shoreline. Emma had been riding ahead of him, as she always did, her confidence growing with each outing. She'd learned to navigate around other path users, to signal her intentions with exaggerated arm movements that made Marcus both proud and slightly nervous. At 8, she was fearless in the way that children are before the world teaches them to be afraid. The jogger appeared around a bend, earbuds in, head down, following the white line painted down the center of the path with the single-minded focus of someone deep in a runner's meditation. Marcus saw him first, registered the potential conflict, but Emma was already in motion, swerving to avoid a family of ducks that had wandered onto the asphalt from the nearby pond. Time moved differently in those moments. Marcus would replay them thousands of times in the months and years that followed, each replay revealing new details, new what-ifs, new moments where different choices might have changed everything. He'd see Emma's handlebars wobble as she tried to correct her course. He'd see the jogger's surprised face as he finally looked up. He'd see his own hand reaching out as if he could somehow bridge the 20 feet between them and pull her to safety. The collision itself was almost gentle. Emma's front wheel clipped the jogger's shin, sending both of them down in what seemed like slow motion. The jogger rolled and came up quickly, bruised but unharmed, already apologizing, already reaching for his phone to call for help. Emma landed differently. Marcus reached her in seconds that felt like hours. She was unconscious, her purple helmet cracked, her mint green shirt torn at the elbow. Her left leg was bent at an angle that made his stomach lurch, but it was her stillness that terrified him most. Emma was never still. Even in sleep, she moved constantly, changing positions, kicking off blankets, murmuring stories to herself. The ambulance arrived within minutes, though Marcus would have sworn it took hours. Paramedics with gentle hands and professional voices assessed her injuries while he held her small hand and whispered promises he didn't know if he could keep. The helicopter ride to Children's Hospital was a blur of medical equipment and urgent conversations he didn't understand. Emma spent 6 weeks in a coma. Marcus never left the hospital. His sister Julia flew in from Portland, bringing changes of clothes and forcing him to eat sandwiches that tasted like cardboard. His employer was understanding, his coworkers sending flowers and cards that piled up in the corner of Emma's room like a garden of good intentions. Friends rotated through in shifts, offering support that Marcus appreciated, but couldn't fully absorb. He read to her every day. Harry Potter, which they'd been working through together, Charlotte's Web, her favorite, picture books from when she was younger, stories about brave princesses and talking animals that had once made her giggle with delight. The nurses said hearing familiar voices could help, so Marcus talked until his throat was raw, telling her about his day, about the weather, about the cards she'd received from her classmates. Dr. Sarah Chun, Emma's neurologist, was kind but honest. The traumatic brain injury was severe. Even if Emma woke up, there would likely be significant challenges. Motor function, speech, memory, all were uncertain. They would take each day as it came, celebrate small victories, and prepare for a long journey. When Emma finally opened her eyes on a Thursday morning in October, Marcus was reading her favorite picture book about a little girl who befriended a dragon. Her brown eyes, so much like his own, focused slowly on his face. She tried to speak but couldn't form words. She tried to move her right hand and succeeded, barely, her fingers twitching against the white hospital blanket. "Hi, sweetheart," Marcus whispered, tears streaming down his face. "Welcome back." The months that followed were filled with challenges Marcus hadn't imagined. Emma's speech returned slowly, words coming back one at a time like pieces of a puzzle reassembling themselves. Her motor skills required intensive therapy. Simple tasks that she'd mastered years ago, holding a spoon, tying her shoes, writing. Her name became monumental achievements, celebrated by teams of therapists and specialists. But it was her personality that changed most dramatically. The fearless, exuberant child who had chattered nonstop about dragons in clouds was replaced by someone quieter, more cautious, easily overwhelmed by noise and activity. She didn't laugh anymore. She smiled sometimes, small polite expressions. That broke Marcus's heart because they seemed to require such effort. The bike in the garage became a monument to before. Marcus couldn't bring himself to move it, but he couldn't bear to look at it either. Emma never asked about riding again. In fact, she seemed uncomfortable around bicycles, turning away when they passed cyclists on the street, changing the channel. If bike races appeared on television, physical therapy sessions took place in a cheerful room decorated with cartoon characters and motivational posters. Emma worked with determination that amazed her therapists, relearning how to walk without assistance, how to climb stairs, how to run in short bursts. But the joy was gone. Exercise had become work, movement had become therapy, and play had become scheduled activities with measurable goals. Marcus threw himself into being the perfect caregiver. He learned about brain injuries, attended support groups, modified their house to accommodate Emma's needs. He installed grab bars in the bathroom, rearranged furniture to create clear pathways, bought organizational systems to help her manage daily tasks that once came naturally. He became an expert in her medications, her therapy schedule, her dietary restrictions. Their new routine was carefully structured. Emma attended a special program at a different school, one better equipped to handle her needs. Marcus worked remotely when possible, taking her to appointments, monitoring her progress, celebrating incremental improvements that felt both miraculous and heartbreakingly small. They ate dinner together each night, watched approved television programs, read books chosen for their therapeutic value rather than their entertainment. The laughter was gone from their house. Marcus tried to be cheerful, telling jokes that fell flat, planning activities that Emma endured rather than enjoyed. He bought funny movies that she watched with polite attention. He tried silly voices when reading bedtime stories, performances that felt forced and desperate. Emma would smile her careful smile and thank him for trying, which somehow made everything worse. 3 years passed in this careful, quiet existence. Emma made progress, significant progress, according to her medical team. She was walking. Well, her speech was clear, though slower than before. Her cognitive abilities were returning, though she tired easily. She was, by all medical measures, a success story. But she was also a stranger to the child who had once pointed out dragon-shaped clouds and demanded piggyback rides through grocery stores. Marcus had stopped laughing too, though he didn't realize it until the day he caught his reflection in the bathroom mirror and was startled by how old he looked. At 38, his dark hair was streaked with premature gray. Lines around his eyes spoke of worry rather than laughter. His smile, when he managed one, never reached his eyes anymore. Their suburban Denver neighborhood had moved on, as neighborhoods do. New families had moved into houses where old families had grown up and moved away. Children who had been Emma's age were now 11, riding bikes through the same streets where Emma had once played, their laughter echoing off the same houses that now felt so quiet. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The Henderson family moved into the blue house across the street on a humid Thursday. In June, Marcus noticed them from his home office window, watching as a moving truck disgorged the familiar chaos of cardboard boxes and furniture wrapped in blankets. A woman with auburn hair directed traffic from the front porch while a tall man in a Broncos t-shirt wrestled with what appeared to be a particularly stubborn sectional sofa. But it was the twins who caught his attention. 2 identical boys, maybe 7 or 8 years old, guarded between the moving crew's legs like caffeinated hummingbirds. They had that summer-buzzed haircut that promised easy mornings and fewer arguments about combing, and they moved with the kind of synchronized chaos that only twins can achieve. One would disappear around the corner of the house just as the other appeared from the opposite direction, creating the illusion of a single extremely fast child with teleportation abilities. Emma was at her Thursday afternoon therapy session with Dr. Rodriguez, working on cognitive exercises that Marcus still didn't fully understand, but trusted were helping. The house felt especially quiet without her careful footsteps and the soft, murmur of the television programs she watched for exactly 1 hour each day before declaring herself done with screen time, in the precise way her occupational therapist had taught her. Marcus had been trying to focus on a client presentation about inventory management systems, but the activity across the street kept drawing his attention. There was something magnetic about families in motion, the purposeful energy of people building a life in a new place. It reminded him of when he and Linda had first moved to this neighborhood, back when Emma was 3 and still young enough to think move-in boxes were personal playground equipment designed specifically for her entertainment. That had been before the divorce, before Linda decided that life in Denver was too quiet for someone with her ambitions. She'd taken a position with a marketing firm in Manhattan, promising to visit regularly, to maintain her relationship with Emma, to co-parent across the distance. The visits had started monthly, then became seasonal, then tapered off to birthday. Phone calls and Christmas cards with generic messages about how much she missed them, both. Emma rarely asked about her mother anymore. Dr. Rodriguez said this was common after traumatic brain injuries. Patients often focused their emotional energy on their immediate support system and found it difficult to maintain connections with people who weren't part of their daily routine. Marcus tried not to feel relieved about this, but sometimes he did anyway. By evening, the moving truck was gone and the Henderson house showed signs of inhabitants. Lights in windows, the blue glow of a television in what was probably the living room, and the twins' bicycles lying in the front yard like abandoned horses after a long ride. The bikes were identical too, red with black trim, clearly new, with training wheels that had been removed, but left telltale marks on the rear axles. Marcus found himself staring at them longer than was probably appropriate for a neighbor he hadn't met yet. They looked fast, well-maintained, ready for adventures that would take their riders far from careful, structured days and therapeutic goals. Emma returned from therapy in her usual post-session state, tired but satisfied, carrying the folder of exercises Dr. Rodriguez had given her to practice at home. She moved through their evening routine with the methodical precision that had replaced spontaneity in their lives. Dinner at 6, one episode of an approved educational program, 30 minutes of reading, bath, bedtime by 8:30. There are new neighbors, Marcus mentioned as they sat down to the grilled chicken and steamed vegetables that comprised most of their dinners these days. Emma's dietary restrictions weren't extensive, but her appetite was small and her preferences had narrowed significantly since the accident. "Okay," Emma said, using her fork to arrange green beans into precise parallel lines on her plate. This was a new habit, one that Dr. Rodriguez said was probably helping her feel more in control of her environment. Marcus had learned not to comment on these small rituals, though sometimes he missed the chaotic way she used to eat, taking bites in random order and talking with her mouth full despite his gentle corrections. "They have twins," he continued. "Boys about your age. Maybe a little younger." Emma nodded politely but didn't look up from her vegetables. She'd become uncomfortable around other children since starting at her new school. The kids in her special program were wonderful, patient, kind, dealing with their own challenges, but they were different from the friends she'd had before the accident. And neighborhood children, with their loud voices and unpredictable energy, seemed to overwhelm her quickly. "They have bikes," Marcus added, then immediately wondered why he'd said it. Emma's face tightened almost imperceptibly, the way it always did when bicycles entered their conversation. "That's nice for them," she said in the careful, polite tone that meant the subject was closed. They finished dinner in comfortable silence, Emma methodically clearing her plate while Marcus planned the next day's schedule. Friday was relatively just a morning session with her speech therapist and an afternoon check-in with Dr. Chen. Maybe they could work in the garden afterward, weather permitting. Emma had shown some interest in helping him plant tomatoes the previous weekend, though she'd tired quickly and gone inside after 20 minutes. The next morning brought the twins to his door. Marcus was in the kitchen, making Emma's breakfast. Steel-cut oats with precisely 1 tablespoon of maple syrup and a handful of blueberries, arranged in a smiley face that she never acknowledged but always ate, when the doorbell rang. Emma was still sleeping, which was unusual. Her internal clock had become remarkably consistent since the accident, waking her at 6:45. Every morning without an alarm. He opened the door to find 2 identical faces staring up at him with the kind of intense curiosity that only children possess. They were clearly the twins from across the street, though in the morning light he could see subtle differences. One had a small scar above his left eyebrow, and the other's front teeth were slightly more crooked. They wore matching Denver Nuggets t-shirts and shorts that suggested they'd dressed themselves without adult supervision. "Hi," said the one with the scar. "I'm Jake Henderson. This is my brother Danny. We live over there." He pointed across the street with the confidence of someone announcing his claim to territory. "We saw you looking at our bikes yesterday," Danny added, which made Marcus flush slightly. He hadn't realized he'd been so obvious. "I'm Marcus Bennett," he said, glancing back toward the stairs where Emma was hopefully still sleeping. "I live here with my daughter. Is she our age?" Jake asked immediately. "Mom said there might be kids in the neighborhood. We haven't met any yet except for the Kowalski twins down the street, but they're teenagers and they just grunt when we say hi." Marcus smiled despite himself. "Emma's 11. She's still sleeping." "Oh," Danny said, clearly disappointed. "We've been up since 6. Mom says we're too excited about the new house to sleep properly. She made us promise not to ring doorbells before 8 o'clock. Marcus checked his watch, 8:03. They'd waited exactly long enough to fulfill their promise while still getting an early start on neighborhood exploration. "We wanted to ask you something," Jake said, suddenly looking less confident. He glanced at his brother, who nodded encouragingly. "Our mom is teaching us to ride bikes without training wheels, but she's not very good at it. She keeps getting scared that we're going to fall," Danny added. "So she holds on too tight and we can't really learn to balance. And our dad is good at it, but he's working a lot because of the new job," Jake continued. "He helped us some last weekend, but mostly we just practice by ourselves in the driveway." Marcus felt something shift in his chest, a recognition he couldn't quite name. "What exactly are you asking?" The twins exchanged another look, and Danny took over. "We were wondering if maybe you could help us learn. We saw you watching our bikes, so we thought maybe you know about riding." "We'd pay you," Jake added quickly. "We have allowance money. $4 each." The offer was so earnest, so carefully planned, that Marcus found himself almost smiling. Almost. "You don't need to pay me anything. But I should probably talk to your parents first." "Oh, Mom said that was okay," Danny said. "She said if you seemed nice and weren't a serial killer or anything, we could ask. We told her you seemed nice because you have flowers in your front yard, and serial killers probably don't garden." Marcus did smile then, just slightly. "That's very logical thinking." "So will you help us?" Jake asked, bouncing slightly on his toes. "We really want to learn before school starts so we can ride with the other kids in our class." Marcus hesitated. The request was simple enough, and he certainly knew how to teach children to ride bikes. He'd taught Emma, after all, back when teaching her things was a joy rather than a carefully monitored therapeutic exercise. But the idea of being around bikes again, of holding small bodies steady while they learned to trust their balance, of running alongside them as they took their first wobbling independent rides. "I'll need to think about it," he said finally. "Okay," Danny said, though he looked disappointed. "How long do you need to think?" Before Marcus could answer, he heard Emma's careful footsteps on the stairs. She appeared in the doorway behind him, already dressed in her usual summer uniform of plain t-shirt and comfortable shorts, her hair brushed neatly back. She looked at the twins with polite curiosity, but didn't move closer to the door. "Good morning, Emma," Marcus said gently. "These are our new neighbors, Jake and Danny Henderson." "Hi," Emma said quietly, her hand finding the doorframe, as if she needed something solid to hold onto. The twins stared at her with the unfiltered interest of children who hadn't yet learned to pretend they weren't curious about differences they couldn't understand. Emma's speech was slower now, more deliberate, and her posture was slightly different, straighter, more careful, like someone always aware of where their body was in space. "You're really pretty," Jake said suddenly, which made Emma's cheeks flush pink. "Do you want to come see our bikes? We have matching ones, but we're learning to ride without training wheels." Emma's hand tightened on the doorframe. I'm not very good with bikes anymore." "That's okay," Danny said immediately. "We're not good with them either. That's why we asked your dad to help us learn." Marcus saw Emma's slight flinch at the word dad, used so casually in connection with bike riding. She glanced up at him with an expression he recognized, part worry, part something that might have been hope. "You asked him to teach you?" she said slowly. "Yeah," Jake said. "We figured he must know about bikes because he looked really interested in ours yesterday. Plus he has the look of someone who's taught kids things before." "What look is that?" Emma asked, and Marcus was surprised to hear genuine curiosity in her voice. Danny considered this seriously. "Patient, I guess. Like he wouldn't get mad if we fell down a lot while we were learning." Emma looked at Marcus again, and this time he saw something in her expression that he hadn't seen in 3 years, a spark of the child who used to beg him to push her higher on swings, who trusted him completely to keep her safe while she learned new things. "Maybe ... she said slowly, then stopped. "Maybe what, sweetheart?" Marcus asked gently. "Maybe I could watch while you teach them. I mean, if you decide to do it." The twins brightened immediately. "That would be awesome," Jake said. "You could be like our audience. And maybe you could give us tips if you see us doing something wrong." "I'm not sure I'd be much help with tips," Emma said, but she was almost smiling. "Sure you would," Danny said with the confidence of someone too young to understand that life could fundamentally change people. "You live with someone who knows about bikes. You probably know stuff just from watching." Marcus felt the weight of their expectations, 3 children looking at him with varying degrees of hope. Emma, who hadn't shown interest in anything bike-related for 3 years. The twins, who seemed to think he had some kind of special knowledge that could unlock their freedom. And underneath it all, his own complicated relationship with the red Schwinn hanging in his garage, covered in dust and draped in memories he'd been avoiding. "Let me talk to your parents first," he said finally. "If they're okay with it, we can try a lesson or 2. The twins whooped with excitement, loud enough that Emma took a small step backward. But she was still almost smiling, and when they promised to be back later with their mom to make it official, she nodded and said she'd like to meet her after. They left. Emma lingered in the doorway, looking across the street at the Henderson house. "They seem nice," she said eventually. "They do," Marcus agreed. "Are you really going to teach them?" she asked. Marcus looked at his daughter, at the careful way she stood, the thoughtful expression on her face, the tiny spark of something that might have been excitement flickering in her eyes. For the first time in 3 years, Emma seemed genuinely interested in something that didn't involve therapy or structured learning goals. "I think I might," he said. Emma nodded slowly. "I think that would be good," she said. "For them, I mean. Every kid should know how to ride a bike." She went back upstairs to brush her teeth, leaving Marcus standing in the doorway, wondering what exactly he'd just agreed to consider. The morning air was already warming, promising another hot summer day, and somewhere across the street, 2 identical boys were probably counting down the minutes until they could return with official parental permission to learn something that Marcus had once loved teaching. Sarah Henderson turned out to be exactly the kind of mother Marcus had expected: organized, friendly, and clearly accustomed to managing the controlled chaos that came with raising identical twin boys. She appeared at his door that afternoon with both twins in tow, carrying a plate of still warm chocolate chip cookies, and wearing the slightly frazzled smile of someone who had spent the morning unpacking kitchen boxes while fielding non-stop questions about when they could go ask the neighbor about bike lessons. "I hope you don't mind the ambush," she said, balancing the cookies while extending her hand for a proper introduction. "I'm Sarah Henderson, and I understand my sons have recruited you for bicycle duty. I wanted to meet you properly and make sure this arrangement works for everyone involved." Marcus accepted the cookies and invited them in, calling up the stairs for Emma to join them if she felt comfortable. She appeared a few minutes later, moving with her characteristic caution, but clearly curious about their visitors. The twins immediately began talking over each other, explaining their elaborate plans for becoming the best bike riders in the whole neighborhood, while Sarah apologized for their enthusiasm and Emma watched with growing fascination. "They've been obsessing about this since we moved in," Sarah explained as the twins demonstrated their current wobbling technique, using imaginary handlebars in Marcus's living room. "My husband Tom is great with them, but his new job at the hospital has him working 12-hour shifts while he gets oriented. I'm decent at many parenting tasks, but apparently I have terrible bicycle teaching instincts." She grabs the seat. "Too tight," Jake explained seriously. "And she makes worried noises when we start to tip, which makes us worried, which makes us fall over faster." "It's like she expects us to crash," Danny added. "Which makes us expect to crash, which makes us actually crash." Emma spoke up unexpectedly. "That's probably because she loves you and doesn't want you to get hurt." Her voice was quiet, but certain. "When people love you, they worry about you getting hurt, even when worry makes things harder." Sarah looked at Emma with surprise and something that might have been recognition. "That's very wise," she said gently. "And probably exactly right. I do worry about them getting hurt." "Everyone gets hurt sometimes when they're learning," Emma continued, glancing at Marcus. "But most hurt isn't permanent. And learning things is important even if it's scary." Marcus felt his breath catch. Emma hadn't spoken this much to strangers since the accident, and certainly not about topics related to risk and getting hurt. Dr. Rodriguez would be fascinated by this development. The twins, meanwhile, had moved on to discussing logistics. They wanted to start immediately, they wanted to practice every day, and they wanted to invite their entire future third-grade class to witness their eventual triumph. Sarah managed to negotiate them down to every other day, weather permitting, with the understanding that Marcus could cancel lessons any time if it became too much. "Are you sure about this?" she asked Marcus quietly while the twins showed Emma their matching baseball card collections. "I know having neighborhood kids underfoot isn't everyone's idea of a relaxing summer." Marcus watched Emma listening intently as Jake explained the difference between rookie cards and veteran cards, her face showing more animation than he'd seen in months. "I think it might be good for all of us," he said, surprising himself with how much he meant it. Emma beamed at the praise, and Marcus realized he hadn't seen that particular expression on her face since before the accident. Pride in her own competence, joy in helping others, satisfaction in a job well done. As the Henderson family headed home, chattering excitedly about their next lesson, Emma lingered in the driveway, looking at the practice area they'd set up. "That was fun," she said quietly. "It was," Marcus agreed, surprised by how much he meant it. "Do you think they'll really learn?" she asked. "I think they will," Marcus said. "They're both determined, and they're not afraid of falling. That's most of what it takes." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "Maybe being not afraid of falling is something you can learn too," she said. Marcus looked at his daughter, at the thoughtful expression on her face, and the way she was studying the bikes leaning against his garage wall, and wondered if she was talking about the twins or about something else entirely. The second lesson took place on a Wednesday morning after a brief thunderstorm had washed the summer heat from the air, leaving everything smelling fresh and green. Emma had been up since dawn, adding new observations to her notebook and setting up what she now called the practice station. With the precision of someone organizing a professional training facility, she'd arranged the orange cones in a more sophisticated pattern, created a designated helmet checking area, and even brought out a small cooler filled with water bottles that she'd labeled with each twin's name in her careful handwriting. Marcus watched her preparations with growing amazement, recognizing a level of enthusiasm and initiative that he hadn't seen since before the accident. "I've been thinking about their different learning styles," Emma announced as Marcus joined her in the driveway. "Jake needs more time to process instructions, but once he understands something, he gets really good at it. Danny learns faster but gets bored if we spend too much time on basics. How did you figure that out from one lesson?" Marcus asked, genuinely curious. Emma consulted her notebook. "I watched how they responded to different types of feedback. Jake got better when you explained why something worked, but Danny improved more when you just showed him what to do differently. Also, Jake practiced the same motion over and over, but Danny kept trying variations even when they didn't work." Marcus shook his head in wonder. His daughter had apparently developed into an expert observer of human behavior, and he hadn't even noticed. "Those are really sophisticated insights, Em. Dr. Rodriguez says that understanding how people learn differently is important for helping them succeed," Emma said. "I thought maybe it would apply to bike riding too." The twins arrived with Tom Henderson this time, their father finally having a morning off from his hospital orientation. Tom was tall and lean with the same boundless energy as his sons, though tempered by the kind of exhaustion that comes with starting a demanding new job while managing twin 7-year-olds. "Sarah told me about yesterday's progress," Tom said, shaking Marcus's hand with genuine gratitude. "The boys haven't stopped talking about it. I think they practiced their pedaling motion in bed last night before falling asleep." "We dreamed about bike riding," Jake confirmed seriously. "In my dream, I could ride so fast that I caught up with cars. In my dream, I could do tricks," Danny added. "Like riding with no hands and jumping over stuff." Emma smiled at their enthusiasm. "Maybe we should focus on riding with both hands first," she suggested diplomatically. "Then work up to the fancy stuff." Tom laughed, and Marcus was startled to realize he was smiling too, really smiling. Not the careful expression he'd worn for so long that his face had almost forgotten how to arrange itself for genuine amusement. Emma's. "The voice of reason," Tom said. "I can see why you two make a good teaching team." The lesson began with Emma conducting what she called bike inspection, checking that helmets were properly fitted and that the twins remembered the basic safety rules they discussed the previous session. She'd prepared small laminated cards with reminders about looking ahead, keeping their feet on the pedals, and using gentle steering movements. "Today we're going to work on longer distances," Marcus announced. "The goal is to make it from the top of the driveway to the mailbox without putting your feet down." Both twins studied the distance with the seriousness of explorers planning an expedition to uncharted territory. The mailbox suddenly seemed very far away. Jake went first, as had become their tradition. His initial attempts were cautious but steady, Marcus jogging alongside with decreasing physical support as Jake's confidence grew. Emma called out encouragement from her folding chair, consulting her notebook for the specific positive reinforcements she'd researched. "Great job keeping your eyes up, Jake. Remember, the bike goes where you're looking." On his fifth attempt, Jake made it past the halfway point before wobbling and putting his foot down. But instead of the frustration Marcus had expected, Jake pumped his fist in the air. "Did you see that? I made it to the flower bed. That's way farther than yesterday." Emma cheered from her chair, and Tom applauded enthusiastically. Marcus felt a warm glow of satisfaction that he barely recognized, the simple pleasure of helping a child succeed, of being part of someone else's moment, of triumph. Danny's turn was characteristically more dramatic. He approached the challenge like a sprinter approaching the starting line, gripping his handlebars with intense concentration before launching himself down the driveway with what could only be described as reckless optimism. His first attempt ended spectacularly, with Danny veering sharply toward the Hendersons' parked car before Marcus managed to grab the bike and steer him back toward safety. Danny emerged from the near miss laughing hysterically. "Did you see how fast I was going? I bet I could have made it all the way to the end of the street." "Let's try for the mailbox first," Marcus suggested, slightly out of breath from the rescue. "Maneuver. Speed isn't everything. Control matters too." Emma stood up from her chair, moving closer to Danny's starting position. "Can I tell you something that might help?" she asked. Danny nodded eagerly, clearly pleased to have Emma's individual attention. "When you're going really fast, it's harder to make small adjustments," Emma said carefully. "But bike riding is mostly about making lots of little adjustments to stay balanced. So maybe try thinking about smooth and steady instead of just fast." Danny considered this with the seriousness he reserved for truly important information. More like a train than a race car?" "Exactly," Emma said, and Marcus saw her face light up with pleasure at Danny's understanding. "Trains are fast, but they're also smooth and steady." Danny's next attempt was a revelation. He still had plenty of enthusiasm, but he'd tempered it with something approaching strategy. He made it 3/4 of the way to the mailbox before a small wobble sent him off course, but his dismount was controlled, and he immediately wanted to try again. "I felt it," he announced. "The smooth and steady thing. It was like the bike wanted to help me balance instead of fighting against me." Tom watched his son's progress with obvious amazement. "I don't know what you two are doing differently," he told Marcus and Emma, "but it's working. At home, they get frustrated after 10 minutes and want to quit. Here, they just keep getting more excited." Emma flushed with pride. "I think it's because we're celebrating the progress instead of focusing on the mistakes," she said. "And we're not worried about them falling down, so they don't feel like they have to be perfect." Marcus looked at his daughter with new understanding. Emma wasn't just helping the twins learn to ride bikes. She was processing her own relationship with risk and failure, working through concepts that her therapist had been trying to help her understand for 3 years. The breakthrough came during Jake's 7th attempt. Marcus had gradually reduced his physical support until he was barely touching the bike, just jogging alongside for moral support. Jake was halfway to the mailbox when Marcus realized he was no longer helping at all. Jake was riding independently, his focus so complete that he hadn't noticed the transition. "Jake," Marcus called softly, not wanting to break his concentration. "Look how far you're going." Jake glanced around and suddenly realized he was riding alone. For a moment, his eyes widened with surprise that might have become panic, but then Emma's voice cut through his uncertainty. "Keep going, you're doing it. Just keep looking ahead." Jake's face transformed into pure joy. He pedaled the remaining distance to the mailbox with growing confidence, executing a slightly wobbly but successful stop right next to the post. The celebration that followed was immediate and enthusiastic, Tom cheering, Emma clapping, Danny jumping up and down with excitement for his brother's success. "I did it. I really did it," Jake called out, his voice carrying across the neighborhood. "I rode all the way by myself." Marcus felt something shift in his chest, a loosening of tension he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. Watching Jake's triumph, seeing the pure joy on his face, Marcus understood something he'd forgotten. Teaching children wasn't just about the skills they learned. It was about helping them discover what they were capable of, about being present. For the moment when they realized they were braver and stronger than they'd thought, Danny's successful ride came 20 minutes later. After several attempts that ended in controlled crashes and increasingly creative explanations for why this attempt would definitely be the one that worked. When he finally made the distance, his celebration was even more exuberant than his brother's, involving victory laps around the driveway and a detailed explanation of exactly how smooth and steady felt different from his previous approach. "Tomorrow, can we try riding to the corner?" Danny asked immediately. "And maybe learn how to turn around without stopping?" "Let's master the mailbox run first," Marcus suggested. "And maybe work on starting and stopping smoothly." Emma had been unusually quiet during the celebrations, watching the twins with a thoughtful expression that Marcus couldn't quite read. When the lesson ended and the Henderson family headed home, she lingered in the driveway, moving the orange cones back into their storage position with unusual care. "That was amazing," she said finally, watching them figure it out. Seeing the exact moment when they realized they could do something they thought was impossible. "It was pretty special," Marcus agreed. Emma was quiet for a long moment, organizing her notebook and water bottles with the methodical precision that had become her way of processing complex emotions. "Do you think quote she began, then stopped. "Do I think what, sweetheart?" Emma looked toward the garage, where her red Schwinn was barely visible in the shadows behind Marcus's car. "Do you think some things can be impossible for a while, but then become possible again later?" Marcus felt his heart speed up. "I think that happens more often than people realize," he said carefully. "Sometimes we need time to be ready for things. Or we need to learn them in a different way than we did before." Emma nodded slowly. "The twins aren't afraid because they don't know what it feels like to really get hurt. But maybe knowing what it feels like to get hurt could actually be helpful if you also know what it feels like to get better." Marcus sat down on the front steps, recognizing that this conversation was more important than any bike lesson. "What are you thinking, Em?" Emma joined him on the steps, her notebook clutched against her chest. "I'm thinking that maybe I've been afraid of the wrong thing. I thought I was afraid of falling off a bike. But really, I think I was afraid of feeling helpless again. Of not being in control." "That makes sense," Marcus said gently. "Feeling out of control is scary, especially when you've been hurt before." "But today, watching Jake and Danny, I realized something," Emma continued. "They're not really in control either. Nobody is when they're learning something new. But they're okay with not being in control because they trust that you'll help them, and they trust that falling down isn't the end of the world." Marcus felt tears prick his eyes. "Do you think you might want to try trusting those things too?" Emma was quiet for so long that Marcus began to think she wasn't going to answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Maybe," she said. "Not today, maybe not tomorrow. But maybe someday soon." Marcus reached over and took her hand, surprised by how much larger it was than he remembered. His little girl was growing up, becoming someone new, not the fearless child she'd been before the accident, but perhaps someone even braver, someone who could choose courage even after learning what it cost. "Whenever you're ready," he said. "I'll be here." Emma squeezed his hand. "I know," she said. "That's what makes it feel possible." That evening, as Marcus was finishing the dinner dishes, he heard an unfamiliar sound from the living room. Emma laughing at something on television. Not the careful, polite laughter she'd been producing in social situations, but real laughter, the kind that bubbled up unexpectedly and refused to be contained. He dried his hands and joined her on the couch, finding her watching a comedy special that she normally would have declared too silly for her refined tastes. When she noticed him watching her instead of the screen, she smiled, the first completely unself-conscious smile he'd seen from her in 3 years. "It's funny," she said, as if this was a revelation worthy of scientific study. "Yes," Marcus agreed, settling beside her on the couch. "It really is." For the first time in 3 years, Marcus Bennett realized he was looking forward to tomorrow. The request came on a Saturday morning, 3 weeks after the twins had mastered their mailbox runs and progressed to elaborate figure-8 patterns around the orange cones. Emma had been tracking their progress in a detailed chart that would have impressed her physical therapist with its thoroughness, documenting everything from successful turns to creative crashes to what she called improvement. Breakthrough moments. Marcus was in the kitchen making pancakes, a weekend tradition they'd recently reinstated, when Emma appeared in the doorway wearing her helmet. Not carrying it, not holding it thoughtfully while she considered possibilities. Wearing it. With the chin strap properly fastened and everything, Marcus nearly dropped the spatula. I want to try," she said quickly, before she could change her mind. "Not riding yet, just sitting on the bike. Maybe pushing it around a little. I think I'm ready for that much." Marcus turned off the burner and gave Emma his complete attention. "Are you sure?" "There's no pressure to—" "I'm sure," Emma interrupted, though her voice shook slightly. "I've been thinking about it for days. I keep imagining what it would feel like, and the imagining isn't scary anymore. Scary, but not the bad kind of scary." Marcus understood exactly what she meant. There was the kind of fear that paralyzed, and the kind that energized. One closed down possibilities, the other opened them up. "Okay," he said simply. "Let's go get your bike." The garage felt different than it had in years, full of potential instead of ghosts. Emma stood beside him as he wheeled her red Schwinn into the sunlight, checking the tire pressure and adjusting the seat height to accommodate 3 years of growth. The bike was bigger than she remembered, but not intimidatingly so. "It's really clean," Emma observed, running her hand along the handlebars. "I thought it would be all dusty and gross." "I've been maintaining it," Marcus admitted, "just in case." Emma smiled at that, the kind of smile that meant she understood the faith that had been required to keep hoping when hope seemed pointless. "Just in case," she repeated softly. They started slowly. Emma simply stood next to the bike for several minutes, reacquainting herself with its dimensions and weight. Then she practiced walking while holding the handlebars, getting used to the bike's balance and movement patterns. Marcus stayed close but didn't hover, letting her set the pace and discover her own comfort level. "It feels smaller than I remembered," Emma said as she guided the bike in a slow circle around the driveway. "But also more manageable. Like something I could actually control instead of something that might run away with me." The twins arrived in the middle of Emma's bike walking practice, appearing at the end of the driveway with their own bikes, and expressions of barely contained excitement. "Emma, are you going to try riding?" Danny called out, immediately understanding the significance of what he was witnessing. "Just walking with it today," Emma replied, but she was smiling. "Maybe sitting on it if that goes well." "That's so cool," Jake said with genuine enthusiasm. "Walking is how we started too, remember? Before the actual pedaling part." Emma looked surprised. "I forgot about that. You did start with walking, didn't you?" "Yeah, and it was super helpful," Danny added. "It helped us figure out how the bike wanted to move before we tried to make it go fast." The twins positioned themselves as unofficial cheerleaders, offering encouragement and sharing their own experiences with the various stages of bike learning. Their natural acceptance of Emma's approach, that this was simply another way of learning something challenging, seemed to relax her in a way that adult reassurances hadn't managed out after 20 minutes of walking practice. Emma announced that she wanted to try sitting on the bike while Marcus held it steady. This required more courage than it appeared, Marcus realized, as he watched her carefully swing her leg over the crossbar and settle onto the seat for the first time in 3 years. "How does it feel?" he asked, keeping his hands firmly on the handlebars and seat. Emma was quiet for a moment, processing the sensations of being back on a bicycle. "Familiar," she said finally, "but different too, like Like visiting a place you used to love after you've changed enough that you see it with new eyes. She sat on the stationary bike for several minutes, adjusting her position and testing the feel of the pedals under her feet. The twins watched with patient interest, somehow understanding that this was a moment that required quiet support rather than enthusiastic commentary. "I think I want to try a little movement," Emma said eventually. "Just a few feet. With you. Holding on." Marcus's heart rate spiked, but he kept his voice calm. "Whatever you're comfortable with." Emma placed her feet on the pedals and pushed down gently, just enough to move the bike forward a few inches. Marcus walked alongside, his grip secure but not restrictive, letting her feel the bike's natural motion while ensuring she was completely safe. They covered maybe 10 feet in this fashion, Emma pedaling slowly, Marcus providing stability, the twins following at a respectful distance. When Emma said, "Stop," Marcus immediately helped her come to a gentle halt. "That was perfect," Emma said, her face flushed with what looked like pride. "I could feel how the bike wanted to balance. It wasn't fighting me the way I remembered." "You're a natural," Jake said admiringly. "It took us way longer to be that. Smooth with the pedaling." "Yeah, and you didn't fall over even once," Danny added. "We fell over like 50 times each." Emma laughed, really laughed, and Marcus felt that now familiar sensation of something loosening in his chest. His daughter was coming back to herself, not as she had been before, but as someone new who incorporated everything she'd learned about resilience and courage. They practiced the same short distance several more times, Emma gaining confidence with each repetition. By the end of the session, she was pedaling more smoothly and seemed genuinely comfortable with the supported movement. "Next time, do you think you might want to try going a little farther?" Marcus asked as they wheeled the bikes back toward the garage. "Maybe," Emma said thoughtfully. "Or maybe I'll want to practice the same distance until it feels completely easy. I'm learning that there's no rush with important things." The twins nodded sagely, as if this was wisdom they'd always understood. Marcus marveled at how much his daughter had learned about patience and self-awareness, qualities that were serving her well now as she approached something that had once seemed impossible. That afternoon, Emma spent time on her computer researching what she called bike readiness techniques. She emerged from her room with a new addition to her notebook, a detailed plan for gradually rebuilding her cycling confidence through incremental challenges. "I found this article about exposure therapy," she explained to Marcus over dinner. "It's for people who have anxiety about things that used to be normal for them. The idea is that you approach the scary thing in tiny steps, so your brain learns that each step is safe before you move to the next one." Marcus was amazed by her methodical approach to overcoming her own fears. "What kinds of steps are you thinking about?" Emma consulted her new notes. "Tomorrow I want to practice sitting on the bike and pedaling in place without actually moving forward. Then maybe pedaling for longer distances with you holding on. Then maybe you holding on but with a lighter grip. Then maybe—" She paused, looking slightly nervous. "Then maybe a few seconds of you letting go, but staying really close." "That sounds like a very sensible plan," Marcus said. "We can take as long as you need for each step." "The article said that rushing exposure therapy can actually make the fear worse," Emma continued. "But going too slowly can make people lose momentum. So the trick is finding the right pace, challenging enough to make progress, but not so challenging that you get overwhelmed." Marcus looked at his daughter with something approaching awe. At 11, she was displaying a level of self-knowledge and strategic thinking that many adults never achieved. The accident had taken away her carefree relationship with risk, but it had given her something else, a profound understanding of how courage actually worked. "You know what I think?" Marcus said. "I think you're going to be an amazing bike rider. Maybe not the same kind you were before, but possibly even better." Emma looked puzzled. "How could I be better?" "I'm more scared now, and I'm not as naturally coordinated as I used to be. Because now you understand things about yourself and about Overcoming challenges that most people never learn, Marcus explained. You know how to break big problems into manageable pieces. You know how to be patient with yourself while still pushing toward goals. You know the difference between good fear and bad fear. Emma considered this seriously. So you think being hurt taught me things that might actually help me? I think being hurt and then choosing to heal taught you things that might help you with everything, Marcus said, not just bike riding. That evening, as they sat on the front porch watching the twins practice their latest skill, riding with one hand while waving with the other, Emma made an observation that surprised Marcus with its insight. They're not afraid because they don't know what could go wrong, she said. But I think maybe not knowing what could go wrong isn't actually the best kind of not being afraid. What do you mean? Marcus asked. I mean, maybe knowing what could go wrong and choosing to try anyway is braver than just not thinking about it, Emma said slowly. The twins are brave because they're innocent. But if I start riding again, I'll be brave because I'm choosing it, even though I know it might hurt. Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion. Do you think that's a better kind of brave? Emma watched the twins execute a particularly elaborate synchronized turn around the orange cones. I think it's a more grown-up kind of brave, she said. And maybe that's what I need to be now. Not the same kind of kid I was before, but the kind of person I'm becoming. As if summoned by their conversation, the twins pedaled over to the porch, slightly out of breath, but glowing with the satisfaction of successful practice. Emma, did you see our new trick? Danny asked. We can ride in a perfect circle now. It was very impressive, Emma said sincerely. You've both improved so much since we started. So have you, Jake pointed out. Today you actually rode. Like really rode, even if it was just a little bit. Emma smiled at the reminder. You're right. I did really ride, didn't I? And tomorrow you're going to ride even more, Danny said with the confidence of someone who had never doubted that progress was inevitable. Pretty soon you'll be doing tricks with us. Emma's smile grew wider. Maybe not tricks right away, but maybe more than just a little bit. As the twins headed home for dinner, chattering excitedly about plans for the next day's lesson, Marcus realized something that he hadn't quite articulated to himself until that moment, somewhere in the process of helping two 7-year-olds learn to ride bikes. He had rediscovered not just his capacity for joy, but his faith in the possibility of healing, and more importantly, his daughter was discovering the same thing. Dad? Emma said as they gathered up the orange cones for the night. Yeah, sweetheart. Tomorrow, after I practice with my bike, do you think you might want to get yours out too? Not to ride together yet, but just so we're both trying something. That feels a little bit scary, but good scary instead of bad scary. Marcus looked at his daughter, at her helmet still on her head, at the notebook clutched in her hands, at the determined expression that was so much braver than fearlessness had ever been, and felt something that he barely recognized, laughter. Real laughter, starting somewhere deep in his chest and bubbling up like a spring that had been buried for 3 years and was finally finding its way back to the surface. I think that sounds perfect, he said, and meant it completely. Sunday. Morning arrived with the kind of golden light that made everything look like it was part of a movie about perfect families, having perfect adventures. Emma was up before Marcus, already dressed and sitting at the kitchen table with 2 bowls of cereal prepared and her notebook open to a fresh page titled, Day 2, Building Independence. I've been thinking about yesterday, she announced as Marcus joined her for breakfast. I want to try longer distances today, but I also want to work on starting and stopping by myself. Those seem like the most important skills for actual bike riding. Marcus studied his daughter's face, looking for signs of anxiety or forced bravery, but found only genuine determination. What made you decide on those specific goals? I watched the twins yesterday after my practice, Emma explained, stirring her cereal thoughtfully. They're really good at the fun parts of riding, going fast, making turns, doing little jumps. But they still need help sometimes with the practical parts, like starting smoothly from a complete stop or stopping exactly where they want to. She flipped to a page covered with detailed observations about the twins' riding techniques, complete with small sketches illustrating different approaches to mounting and dismounting. I realized that if I focus on mastering the basics really well, the fun parts might come more naturally later. But if I try to skip to the fun parts without getting the basics right, I might develop bad habits that are hard to fix. Marcus marveled at this level of strategic thinking from an 11-year-old. That's incredibly smart, Em. Most people want to jump straight to the exciting stuff. Most people probably haven't spent 3 years thinking about every step of a process, Emma said with a slight smile. I've had a lot of practice breaking things down into tiny pieces. After breakfast, they wheeled both bikes out of the garage. Marcus's mountain bike looked almost foreign to him after 3 years of neglect, but a quick inspection revealed that his maintenance habits had served it well. The gears shifted smoothly, the brakes responded properly, and the tires held air. Without any obvious problems, Emma noticed his hesitation as he adjusted his helmet for the first time in years. "Are you nervous too?" she asked. "A little," Marcus admitted. "Not about the riding itself, but about ... I don't know. About what it means to be doing this with you again." Emma nodded with the understanding of someone who had spent considerable time thinking about the emotional weight of returning to interrupted activities. It's okay to be nervous about the meaning part. Dr. Rodriguez says that sometimes the emotions around doing something can be more complicated than actually doing the thing itself. The twins arrived as they were conducting their pre-ride safety check, wheeling their bikes with the casual confidence of children who had completely internalized a skill that had once seemed impossible. They immediately understood that today was different. Both Marcus and Emma had their bikes out. Both were wearing helmets. Both carried the slightly tense energy of people preparing for something significant. "Are you both going to ride today?" Jake asked, his voice carefully neutral in the way that suggested Sarah had coached him about not overwhelming Emma with too much enthusiasm. "Emma's going to work on starting and stopping," Marcus said. "And I'm going to try riding a little bit myself. It's been a while for me too." Danny looked puzzled. "But you're a grown-up. Don't grown-ups already know how to ride bikes?" "They do," Emma answered before Marcus could respond. "But sometimes when people don't do something for a long time, it can feel scary to start again, even if they remember how. It's not about forgetting the skill. It's about feeling ready to trust yourself with the skill again." The twins absorbed this explanation with the seriousness they reserved for particularly important life lessons. Marcus was continually amazed by how naturally Emma had learned to articulate complex emotional concepts in ways that children could understand. Emma's practice began with stationary work, sitting on her bike while Marcus held it steady, practicing the motion of pushing off with one foot while settling her other foot on the pedal. She worked through this sequence dozens of times, developing muscle memory for the coordination required to begin riding smoothly. "It's like a dance," she observed after her 10th repetition. "Push, settle, pedal, balance. Push, settle, pedal, balance." The twins watched with fascination, recognizing movements they had learned instinctively, but had never broken down into discrete components. "We never thought about it being separate steps," Jake said. "We just kind of threw ourselves forward and hoped it worked." "That worked for you because you weren't thinking about what could go wrong," Emma replied. "But thinking about what could go wrong isn't always bad. It can help you prepare for problems before they happen." When Emma felt ready, Marcus positioned himself beside her bike and they began moving forward. Unlike the previous day's tentative pedaling, Emma now approached the movement with methodical confidence. She was still nervous. Marcus could see it in the careful way she gripped the handlebars, but it was productive nervousness, the kind that sharpened focus rather than creating panic. They made 3 complete circuits of the driveway. Emma pedaling steadily while Marcus provided stability and guidance. Her balance was remarkably good, requiring less support than Marcus had expected. More importantly, she seemed to be enjoying herself, occasionally commenting on how different things looked from the perspective of someone actually riding rather than walking alongside. "I can see the Kowalski's garden from here," she said during their second loop. "It's much prettier than I realized. You can see all the different colors when you're up higher." The breakthrough came during their fourth circuit, when Emma announced that she wanted to practice stopping by herself. Marcus helped her come to a gentle halt in the center of the driveway, then stepped back while she practiced the coordination required to brake smoothly and put her feet down in the right sequence. "The stopping is actually harder than the riding," she said after several attempts. "There's more to think about: when to start braking, which foot to put down first, how to lean the bike so it doesn't tip over. But you're getting really good at it," Danny observed. "Look how straight you keep the bike when you stop. When we learned, we used to tip over sideways almost every time." Emma beamed at the compliment, and Marcus realized that the twins' presence was providing something he couldn't have given her alone: perspective from other children who had recently struggled with the same challenges. Their matter-of-fact acceptance of difficulty as a normal part of learning was helping Emma normalize her own process. After 30 minutes of practice, Emma declared herself ready for what she called the independence test, starting from a complete stop, riding a moderate distance, and stopping where she intended to stop, all without Marcus touching the bike. "Are you sure?" Marcus asked, his heart rate spiking at the idea of letting go completely. "I'm sure," Emma said, though her voice carried a slight tremor. "But maybe start by just barely touching the bike? Like, close enough to catch me if something goes wrong, but not actually helping unless I need it." Marcus understood perfectly. She needed to know she was truly riding alone, but also needed the security of knowing help was immediately available if required. It was a reasonable compromise between independence and safety. Emma positioned herself at the top of the driveway, Marcus standing close enough to intervene, but not close enough to provide any actual support. The twins watched from their folding chairs, Emma's notebook open between them as they prepared to document this milestone. "Push, settle, pedal, balance," Emma whispered to herself, then executed the sequence she'd been practicing. The start was perfect, smooth, controlled, no wobbling or uncertainty. Emma pedaled steadily down the driveway, her focus complete, her balance natural. Marcus jogged alongside at a distance, marveling at how competent she looked, how much like her old self she appeared when she was concentrating on something challenging. The stop was equally impressive. Emma began braking well before her intended target, came to a controlled halt exactly beside the mailbox, and dismounted with the kind of fluid grace that suggested muscle memory was beginning to reassert itself. The silence that followed lasted for several heartbeats, broken when Danny shouted, "Mame! You did it! You really, really did it!" Emma's smile was radiant, transforming her entire face in a way Marcus hadn't seen since before the accident. Not the careful, polite expression she'd been wearing for 3 years, but pure, unguarded joy. "I did do it," she said, wonder in her voice. "I actually rode by myself, all the way down the driveway, by myself." The twins erupted from their chairs to congratulate her, their enthusiasm infectious enough that Emma found herself laughing at their elaborate celebration dance. Marcus stood at the top of the driveway, watching his daughter accept praise for an achievement that would have seemed insignificant to most people, but represented a complete revolution in her relationship with fear and possibility. "Your turn, Dad," Emma called up to him. "Time for you to remember what this feels like." Marcus approached his own bike with considerably more nervousness than he'd expected. The physical act of riding wasn't intimidating. He was confident that the skill was still there, waiting to be accessed. But the emotional weight of returning to something that had been central to his relationship with Emma felt enormous. He mounted the bike carefully, aware that 3 children were watching his every movement with intense interest. The seat felt higher than he remembered, the handlebars positioned differently than his muscle memory expected. For a moment, he wondered if he was making a mistake, if this was too much too fast. Then Emma's voice cut through his uncertainty. "It's okay to be nervous, Dad. Being nervous just means you're doing something that matters to you." Marcus looked at his daughter, at her encouraging smile, her dirt-smudged hands from working with her bike, her helmet still perfectly positioned, and felt his anxiety transform into something else entirely. Not fearlessness, but the willingness to be afraid for the right reasons. He pushed off and immediately understood what Emma had meant about muscle memory. His body knew how to do this, even if his mind was cluttered with complicated emotions. The bike moved smoothly beneath him, responsive to small shifts in weight and direction. The sensation was simultaneously familiar and revelatory, like rediscovering a language he'd thought he'd forgotten. Marcus rode to the end of the driveway and back. Nothing fancy or ambitious, just the simple pleasure of pedaling and steering, and feeling the summer air move around him. When he stopped beside Emma, he was surprised to find that his eyes were damp. "How was it?" Emma asked softly. "Perfect," Marcus said, and meant it. Absolutely perfect. The twins had been watching with the kind of reverent attention usually reserved for significant ceremonies, somehow understanding that they were witnessing something important. When Marcus dismounted, Jake spoke with uncharacteristic seriousness. "That was really cool," he said. "You looked happy while you were riding. Different happy than regular happy." Marcus considered this observation, recognizing its accuracy. "I think I'd forgotten what that kind of happy felt like," he said. "But now you remember?" Danny asked. Marcus looked at Emma, who was studying him, with an expression of profound satisfaction, as if she'd just solved a puzzle she'd been working on for years. "Yeah," Marcus said, "now I remember." They spent the rest of the morning practicing together, Emma working on longer distances and more confident turns, Marcus reacquainting himself with the simple joy of cycling, the twins providing commentary and encouragement that kept everyone focused on progress rather than perfection. When they finally wheeled their bikes back to the garage, Emma paused before returning hers to its storage position. "I want to keep it out here," she said, indicating a spot near the garage door where the bike would be easily accessible. "Not put away like something I might use someday, but ready like something I'm planning to use tomorrow." Marcus understood the significance of this decision. For 3 years, putting the bike away had been an act of hope deferred. Leaving it readily available was an act of faith in her own continuing courage. "I think that's a perfect place for it," he said, that afternoon, as they sat on the front porch, sharing sandwiches and watching the twins practice increasingly elaborate writing techniques. Emma made an announcement that surprised Marcus with its confidence. "Next week, I want to try riding to the corner," she said. "Not just down the driveway, but actually out into the neighborhood, like a real bike ride." Marcus felt his protective instincts flare, but he recognized them for what they were: echoes of the fear that had kept both of them trapped for 3 years. "Are you sure you're ready for that?" Emma smiled, and Marcus saw in her expression something that had been missing for so long he'd forgotten what it looked like. His daughter's natural boldness, tempered now by wisdom but still fundamentally intact. "I'm sure," she said. "I know. It might be scary, and I know things could go wrong. But I also know that I'm strong enough to handle scary things, and smart enough to be careful about the things that could go wrong." She paused, watching the twins execute a synchronized figure 8 around the orange cones that Marcus realized he no longer needed to supervise constantly. "Besides," Emma added with a grin that reminded Marcus of exactly who his daughter had always been underneath all the caution and careful control. "If Jake and Danny can learn to do tricks, I bet I can learn to do adventures." Marcus laughed, really laughed, the kind of deep, genuine laughter that starts in your chest and spreads outward until your whole body is involved. Emma joined him, and soon they were both laughing so hard that the twins stopped their practice to investigate the source of all the noise. "What's so funny?" Jake called out. "Everything," Emma replied, still giggling. "Everything is funny when you're not scared of it anymore." And Marcus realized, with a clarity that felt like waking up from a very long dream, that his daughter was absolutely right. The corner expedition took place on a Wednesday morning 3 weeks later, after Emma had spent the intervening time building her confidence with increasingly ambitious driveway adventures. She could now execute smooth starts, controlled stops, confident turns, and even basic obstacle navigation around the orange cones that had become a permanent fixture of their practice area. More importantly, she had rediscovered the simple pleasure of riding for its own sake. Marcus often found her outside after dinner, pedaling lazy circles around the driveway while she processed her day or worked through homework problems aloud. The methodical rhythm of cycling seemed to help her think, much the way it once had. For him, the twins had graduated to more complex skills, riding with one hand, executing tight turns, and attempting what they called advanced cone choreography. But they still showed up for Emma's practice sessions, offering encouragement and celebrating her progress with the same enthusiasm they brought to their own achievements. On the morning of the corner ride, Emma appeared at breakfast with her helmet already on and a detailed route map sketched in her notebook. "I've planned our path," she announced, spreading the map across the kitchen table. "Down Maple Street to the stop sign, right turn onto Cedar, then down to the big oak tree and back. Total distance, approximately 4 blocks. Estimated riding time, 12 minutes. Safety considerations: 2 crosswalks, 1 stop sign, minimal traffic." Marcus studied her route, impressed by the thoroughness of her planning. "You've really thought this through." "I've been thinking about it every day for 3 weeks, Emma admitted. "I wanted to make sure I was ready for all the variables. Other pedestrians, cars, different types of pavement, hills, turns that aren't in our driveway." She flipped to another page, showing detailed sketches of potential challenges: uneven sidewalks, parked cars that might block visibility, dogs that might run toward the street. Emma had developed contingency plans for each scenario, demonstrating a level of risk assessment that would have impressed professional safety managers. "What if we encounter something you haven't planned for?" Marcus asked, genuinely curious about how she would handle unexpected situations. Emma considered this seriously. "Then we'll stop, figure it out together, and add it to my notebook for next time. I can't plan for everything, but I can plan to be flexible when I encounter things I didn't expect." The twins arrived as they were loading water bottles and Emma's first aid kit into Marcus's backpack. Both boys were practically vibrating with excitement about Emma's first real bike ride, though they'd been carefully coached about maintaining appropriate emotional volume levels. "This is so awesome," Danny said, then immediately lowered his voice. "I mean, this is really cool, Emma. You're going to love riding in the actual neighborhood. Everything looks different when you're riding." Jake added, "Like, you notice things you never saw before when you were just walking or in a car." Sarah Henderson appeared as they were conducting final safety checks, carrying a thermos of coffee and wearing the slightly anxious expression of a mother watching someone else's child attempt something brave. "Tom wanted me to tell you good luck," she said to Emma. "He's at the hospital, but he said to make sure someone takes pictures of your first neighborhood ride." Emma smiled at the sentiment. "Will you take some pictures for him? I'd like to remember this." The expedition began with a ceremonial photo session, Emma standing beside her bike at the end of the driveway, looking determined and slightly nervous but undeniably ready. The twins positioned themselves as official escorts, though they understood that this was Emma's adventure and they were there primarily for moral support. The first block was a revelation. Emma rode with careful confidence, her balance steady, her attention focused but not tense. She called out observations as they traveled, Flowers she'd never noticed in neighbors' gardens, architectural details that were only visible from bicycle height, the different texture of street pavement compared to their smooth driveway. "The Kowalski house has a weather vane shaped like a rooster," she announced as they passed the teenager's house. "And the Martinezes have a vegetable garden in their backyard that's much bigger than I thought." Marcus rode slightly behind her, close enough to provide assistance if needed, but far enough to give her the independence she'd earned. Watching Emma navigate the neighborhood with growing confidence, he realized that something fundamental had shifted in how he thought about risk and protection. For 3 years, his primary goal had been to keep Emma safe from anything that might hurt her. But safety, he now understood, wasn't the absence of risk, it was the presence of skills, judgment, and support that allowed someone to engage with risk intelligently. Emma was demonstrating all three. The stop sign presented their first real-world challenge. Emma had practiced stopping on command dozens of times in their driveway, but stopping at a specific location while monitoring traffic conditions required a different level of coordination. She approached the intersection carefully, began braking well in advance, and came to a controlled stop exactly where she intended. "Perfect technique," Marcus said, meaning it completely. "It felt different than practicing at home," Emma replied, scanning the intersection with methodical attention. "More variables to think about, but also more purposeful. Like, stopping because you need to evaluate traffic is different from stopping just to practice stopping." They waited at the intersection while Emma conducted what she called a comprehensive safety assessment, checking for approaching vehicles, pedestrians, and anything else that might affect their crossing. When she declared the intersection safe, they proceeded with the kind of careful attention that Marcus realized had become second nature for his daughter. The twins rode alongside Emma with visible pride, clearly understanding that they were witnessing something significant. Jake documented their progress with a disposable camera his mother had provided, while Danny maintained what he called perimeter awareness, watching for potential hazards with the seriousness of a professional security detail. Cedar Street presented new challenges: a slight uphill grade, several parked cars that created visual obstacles, and a dog behind a fence that barked enthusiastically at passing cyclists. Emma handled each situation with the methodical problem-solving approach she'd developed, slowing down when visibility was limited, maintaining safe distance from parked vehicles, and continuing to pedal steadily despite the dog's vocal commentary. "The hill is harder than I expected," she said as they approached the midpoint of the climb. "But not impossible hard. Just requires more effort hard." Marcus recognized this distinction as another example of Emma's sophisticated understanding of difficulty. She had learned to differentiate between challenges that required persistence and challenges that indicated genuine problems, a skill that would serve her well beyond cycling. The oak tree that marked their turnaround point was larger and more magnificent than any of them had realized from car window glimpses. Emma circled it slowly, marveling at its massive trunk and the way its branches created a natural canopy over the intersection. "I want to remember this exactly," she said, dismounting to touch the tree's bark. "This is the tree where I became someone who rides bikes to places again." The return journey felt different, more relaxed, more confident, tinged with the satisfaction of a goal achieved. Emma rode with the easy grace of someone who was no longer thinking primarily about the mechanics of cycling, but was beginning to experience it as a form of exploration and enjoyment. They stopped at the same intersection, conducted the same safety assessment, and proceeded with the same careful attention to potential hazards. But Emma's demeanor had shifted from cautious determination to genuine pleasure. She was no longer enduring the challenge of bike riding. She was enjoying the adventure of it. "Can we do this again tomorrow?" she asked as they turned onto their street. "Maybe go a little farther next time?" Marcus felt his heart swell with pride and something that might have been relief. "We can go as far as you want to go," he said. "Whenever you're ready." The triumphant return to their driveway was met with enthusiastic celebration from the assembled audience. Sarah with her camera, the twins with congratulatory cheers, and Tom Henderson, who had apparently rushed home from the hospital to witness Emma's return from her first neighborhood adventure. "How was it?" Tom asked as Emma dismounted with visible satisfaction. "Perfect," Emma said immediately. "Challenging but manageable. Scary but good scary. Everything I hoped it would be." She paused, looking around at the faces of people who had become, over the course of several weeks, an extended family of sorts, the neighbors who had believed. In her readiness to try again, the children who had reminded her what learning looked like, the adults who had provided support without overwhelming protection. "Actually," Emma continued, "it was better than perfect. It was real." That afternoon, as they sat on the front porch, sharing celebratory ice cream, Emma made an announcement that surprised Marcus with its ambition. "I want to plan a longer adventure," she said, consulting the neighborhood map she'd been studying with increasing interest. "Maybe to the library or the park where we used to ride before everything changed." Marcus felt a complex mix of emotions at the mention of Cherry Creek State Park, pride in Emma's courage, excitement about the possibility of returning to a place that held both beautiful and terrible memories, and a deep gratitude for the journey that had brought them to this moment. "Cherry Creek?" he asked gently. Emma nodded, her expression serious but not fearful. "I think I'm ready to go back there. Not to erase what happened, but to add new memories alongside the old ones. To prove that what happened there wasn't the end of the story, just a really hard chapter." She looked at Marcus with an expression that was both vulnerable and determined. "Will you go with me? Not as someone who's worried about me getting hurt again, but as someone who wants to see what it feels like to ride there together now that we're both different people than we were before." Marcus felt tears prick his eyes, moved by his daughter's courage and by the recognition that she was right. They were both different people now, shaped by loss and healing in ways that had made them stronger rather than simply more careful. "I would be honored to ride with you," he said. The twins, who had been listening to this conversation with the fascination of children witnessing adult emotions they didn't fully understand but recognized as important, volunteered to come along as support crew. "We could bring a picnic," Jake suggested, "and maybe teach you some of our new tricks when we get there." "That sounds perfect," Emma said, and Marcus could hear in her voice something he'd been waiting 3 years to hear again: pure, uncomplicated happiness. That evening, as Marcus was putting away the bikes, he found Emma sitting in the garage, simply looking at her red Schwinn with an expression of quiet satisfaction. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "How different everything looks now," Emma said. 3 months ago, I couldn't even be in the same room as this bike. Now it's just a bike. A really good bike that I happen to know how to ride." She stood up, brushing dust off her hands. "Dr. Rodriguez says that healing isn't about going back to who you were before something bad happened. It's about becoming someone who can carry what happened and still choose to do beautiful things." Marcus looked at his daughter, at her dirt-smudged clothes from a day of adventure, her helmet hanging casually from the handlebars of a bike she'd reclaimed, her face showing the kind of deep contentment that comes from conquering something that once seemed impossible. "I think," Marcus said, "that you've become someone pretty extraordinary." Emma smiled, the kind of smile that started small and grew until it transformed her entire face. "We both have," she said. "We both have." As they walked back toward the house together, Marcus realized that somewhere in the process of teaching 2 7-year-old boys to ride bicycles, he and Emma had learned something even more valuable: that healing was possible, that joy could return after loss, and that sometimes the best way to rediscover laughter was to help someone else discover their own courage. Behind them, 2 red bicycles sat side by side in the garage, no longer monuments to what had been lost, but promises of adventures yet to come. 6 months later, on a crisp October morning that painted the cottonwood trees in shades of gold and amber, 4 bicycles wound their way along the familiar paths of Cherry Creek State Park. Emma led the group, her red Schwinn gleaming in the autumn sunlight, while Marcus rode beside her with the relaxed posture of someone who had rediscovered an old joy. Behind them, Jake and Danny provided enthusiastic commentary about everything from migrating geese to the physics of leaf-falling patterns. "Look how the path curves around that bend," Emma called out, pointing toward a section of trail that had once been the site of her nightmares. "I never noticed how beautiful the design is when you're not focused on just getting through it safely." The return to Cherry Creek had happened gradually, over multiple visits that built from cautious exploration to genuine enjoyment. Their first trip back had been emotional for both Marcus and Emma, but not in the way either had expected. Instead of being overwhelmed by traumatic memories, they found themselves able to hold space for both the difficult history and the present joy of being there together. "Race you to the picnic tables," Danny shouted, immediately spurring his bike forward with characteristic enthusiasm. "No racing near the pond," Emma called after him with the authoritative voice of someone who had become the group's unofficial safety coordinator. "Too many variables with the ducks and other path users." Jake grinned as he passed Marcus. "She sounds just like Mom now," he said, "but in a good way." Marcus laughed, marveling at how natural that sound had become again. Emma's transformation into someone who could balance caution with adventure had been remarkable to witness, but his own journey back to spontaneous laughter felt equally miraculous. They settled at their usual picnic spot, a cluster of tables overlooking the reservoir where Emma now practiced her increasingly ambitious cycling skills. What had started as basic riding had evolved into confident navigation of hills, comfortable group riding, and even some of the advanced techniques the twins had been eager to demonstrate. "Okay, Emma, today's the day," Jake announced as they unpacked their lunch. "You promised you'd try riding with one hand." Emma considered this seriously, as she did most challenges these days. "I've been practicing the motion while stationary," she said, "and I understand the balance principles. I think I'm ready for a short attempt." Marcus watched his daughter approach this new skill with the same methodical confidence she'd brought to every stage of her cycling recovery. She mounted her bike, rode a comfortable distance to build momentum, then carefully lifted her right hand from the handlebars for approximately 3 seconds before returning it to safety. The celebration that followed was immediate and enthusiastic, though Emma's response was characteristically measured. "That felt stable," she reported. "I think with more practice I could extend the duration and maybe even try basic steering adjustments." "You're amazing," Danny said with sincere admiration. "It took us like 50 tries to do it for even 1 second." Emma smiled at the compliment, but Marcus could see her mentally cataloging the experience for future reference. His daughter had developed an impressive ability to learn from both successes and failures, treating each as valuable data rather than judgments about her capabilities. As they shared sandwiches and watched other families enjoy the park, Marcus reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought them to this moment. Teaching the Henderson twins to ride bikes had begun as a simple neighborly favor, but it had evolved into something transformative for everyone involved. The twins had gained not just cycling skills, but confidence in their ability to master challenging tasks through persistence and practice. Sarah and Tom had discovered that their protective instincts could coexist with allowing their children to take appropriate risks. And Emma had rediscovered her own courage while learning to help others find theirs. "Dad?" Emma's voice interrupted his reverie. "What are you thinking about?" "Just remembering that first day when Jake and Danny knocked on our door," Marcus said. "Did you ever imagine we'd end up here?" Emma followed his gaze across the water, toward the path where their old life had ended and their new one had eventually begun. I imagined a lot of things during those 3 years, she said quietly. Most of them involved staying safe by avoiding anything that felt risky. I never imagined that helping other people learn to be brave would teach me how to be brave. Again myself. The twins had wandered over to investigate a family of ducks, their voices carrying across the water as they debated whether the ducklings were old enough to survive the approaching winter. Marcus was struck by how naturally they'd all learn to balance supervision with independence, staying close enough to ensure safety while allowing space for exploration and discovery. I want to try something, Emma announced suddenly, standing up from the picnic table with the kind of determined expression that Marcus had learned usually preceded significant developments. What kind of something? He asked, recognizing the importance of the moment, but trying to keep his voice casual. Emma gestured toward a section of path that wound through the trees, more challenging terrain than their usual routes. I want to ride the trail loop, the whole thing. Not just the easy parts near the water, but the section with the hills and the narrow passages. Marcus felt his protective instincts flare briefly, then consciously relaxed them. Emma had earned the right to make decisions about her own risk tolerance, and she'd repeatedly demonstrated excellent judgment about her capabilities. That's about 3 miles of varied terrain, he said, making sure she understood the scope of what she was proposing. I know, Emma replied. I've been studying the trail map for weeks. I think I'm ready for it, but I want you to come with me. Not to help or worry, but to share the adventure. The twins returned from their duck investigation just in time to hear Emma's proposal, and their excitement was immediate and overwhelming. Can we come too? Jake asked. We've never done the whole loop. Are there really steep hills? Danny added. Because steep hills are the best part of bike riding once you figure out how to not fall off them. Emma looked at Marcus, and he saw in her expression something he'd been hoping to see for months. The desire to share her achievements with the people who had helped make them possible. I think that sounds like the perfect way to end our season of bike lessons, Marcus said. The trail loop proved to be everything Emma had prepared for and more. The hills required sustained effort and careful gear management. The narrow sections demanded precise steering and awareness of other trail users. The varied terrain, packed dirt, occasional gravel, scattered leaves made slippery by morning dew, tested every skill they'd developed over the past 6 months. Emma navigated each challenge with growing confidence, calling out obstacles for the twins and maintaining the kind of steady pace that indicated complete comfort with her bike's capabilities. Marcus rode behind the group, marveling at how naturally his daughter had assumed leadership of their small cycling expedition. This is the best day ever, Danny announced as they crested the highest hill on the trail, the reservoir spread out below them like a mirror reflecting the autumn sky. It really is, Emma agreed, and Marcus could hear in her voice something that took him a moment to identify. Pure, uncomplicated happiness. As they completed the loop and returned to their starting point, Marcus realized that somewhere during their ride, something significant had shifted. Emma was no longer someone recovering from trauma who happened to be learning to ride bikes again. She was simply someone who enjoyed cycling, who was good at it, and who looked forward to future adventures on 2 wheels. So, Emma said as they loaded their bikes for the drive home, I've been thinking about our next goal. What kind of goal? Marcus asked, though he was grinning because he recognized the tone of voice that indicated Emma was planning something ambitious. Emma consulted the small notebook she still carried, though it now contained route maps and technique notes rather than anxiety management strategies. There's a family cycling event next spring, she said. A 20-mile ride through the foothills to raise money for the children's hospital. I think we should register as a team. Marcus felt his heart swell with pride and something that might have been amazement. 20 miles is a significant distance, he said. Are you sure you're ready for that kind of challenge? Emma smiled, and Marcus saw in her expression complete confidence in her own capabilities. "I'm sure I can get ready for it," she said, "especially if I have the right training partners." The twins immediately volunteered for training duty already, making elaborate plans for practice routes and conditioning schedules. Marcus listened to their enthusiastic discussion and realized that what had begun as bike lessons had evolved into something much more valuable. A community of people who believed in each other's potential and enjoyed working together toward shared goals. As they drove home through the golden afternoon light, Emma made one final observation that perfectly captured the transformation they'd all experienced. "You know what I figured out today?" she said, watching the familiar landscape pass by her window. "What's that, sweetheart?" "The best part about not being afraid anymore isn't that nothing bad can happen," Emma said thoughtfully. "It's that I know I can handle things if they do happen. And I know I don't have to handle them alone." Marcus reached over and squeezed her hand, understanding that his daughter had learned something about resilience that would serve her well far beyond cycling. "Plus," Emma added with a grin that reminded Marcus exactly who she'd always been underneath, "all the caution and careful control. It turns out that when you're not spending all your energy being scared, you have a lot more energy left over for having fun." Marcus laughed, the kind of deep, genuine laughter that starts in your chest and spreads outward until your whole body is involved. Emma joined him, and soon the entire car was filled with the sound of people who had rediscovered not just their capacity for joy, but their willingness to share it. In the back seat, two identical boys who had once knocked on a stranger's door asking for bike lessons chattered excitedly about 20-mile rides and advanced cycling techniques and all the adventures that were waiting for them just down the road. And Marcus Bennett, who hadn't laughed in 3 years until two 7-year-olds asked him to teach them something he'd thought he'd lost forever, realized that sometimes the best way to find your way back to happiness is to help someone else discover their own courage. Sound of laughter filled the car all the way home. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.